Who's pulling your strings? A deep dive into the hidden forces and reclaiming your psychological power. Have you ever been subtly influenced by others without realizing it? A friend says, "If you don't help me, are you really my friend?" And you reluctantly lend a hand. Your boss says, "This is your big opportunity," pushing you to take on overwhelming work. Your partner says, "You're letting me down," making you change your decision. These subtle manipulations, like invisible strings, pull at our behaviors and emotions. Who's Pulling Your Strings? By psychologist George K. Simon explores the mechanisms, forms, and countermeasures of manipulative behavior, revealing how people are controlled in relationships and how to reclaim psychological autonomy. Why are we so easily swayed by others? Let's dive into the world of manipulation psychology, uncover its hidden power, and learn to protect our inner freedom. Manipulation psychology studies the process of influencing others' behavior through psychological strategies, common in intimate relationships, workplaces, and social settings. Data from the American Psychological Association shows that about 65% of people experience some form of manipulation in their lives, with negative mental health impacts that can last for years. Simon cites a Stanford University social influence experiment when participants face subtle psychological pressure, like guilt induction, their decisions significantly align with the manipulator's intentions. This suggests manipulation is not just a strategy but an art that exploits human psychological vulnerabilities. Manipulation isn't always malicious. Sometimes it's cloaked in care. For example, Simon notes how Apple co-founder Steve Jobs used inspirational language and emotional pressure to push employees beyond their limits. A former employee recalled, he'd say, "This is your chance to change the world," making you feel like slacking was betraying a mission. This type of manipulation, though seemingly positive, can lead people to neglect their own needs. Simon argues that manipulation psychology hinges on exploiting power dynamics, emotional appeals, and social norms to quietly alter others' behavior. To counter manipulation, we must understand its nature, recognize its signs, and learn to break free from its invisible control. This article starts with the essence of manipulation psychology, dissecting its types, impacts, and countermeasures, guiding you from being a passive victim to a master of your own mind. The essence and mechanisms of manipulation psychology. What is the essence of manipulation psychology? Simon defines it as the process of influencing others' behavior through psychological strategies to achieve one's own goals. Unlike direct commands or force, manipulation operates covertly, leveraging emotions, cognitive biases, or social pressures. The mechanisms of manipulation can be analyzed through psychological and sociological lenses, involving the manipulator's motives, the victim's responses, and cultural influences. Psychologically, manipulation stems from a manipulator's desire for power or insecurity. Simon notes that manipulators often control others by triggering guilt, fear, or a sense of duty. For instance, a partner might say, "If you don't spend time with me, you don't love me," driven by a need to control the relationship. Psychologist Robert Cialdini, in Influence, identifies 6 principles manipulators exploit: reciprocity, commitment, authority, liking, social proof, and scarcity. For example, the reciprocity principle creates pressure to repay favors, making people more susceptible to manipulation. Manipulation operates in 3 stages: building rapport, applying pressure, and guiding behavior. Simon calls this the manipulation triangle. First, manipulators build trust or emotional bonds to lower defenses. Then they apply psychological pressure, like guilt or fear. Finally, they steer the target toward specific actions. Stanford research shows guilt induction can increase compliance by 30% as people avoid negative emotional experiences. Social and cultural contexts provide fertile ground for manipulation. In cultures emphasizing collective responsibility or harmony, manipulation may be seen as a legitimate communication tactic. For example, workplace team spirit is often used to pressure employees into sacrificing personal time. Simon cites a Google study: when managers use team goals to exert pressure, employees' stress rises by 25%, yet they struggle to refuse, fearing they'll seem uncooperative. From an evolutionary psychology perspective, manipulation's prevalence is tied to humans' sensitivity to social bonds as social animals. Rejection triggers neural responses akin to physical pain, according to neuroscientist Matthew Lieberman, who found manipulation targets the brain's anterior cingulate cortex by exploiting desires for belonging or fears of exclusion. This explains why manipulation is so effective. It taps into our deep need for connection. Manipulation's complexity lies in its varied motives. Some manipulators act deliberately to achieve goals, while others manipulate unconsciously due to poor emotional regulation. For instance, a friend might use coldness to pressure compliance out of jealousy without realizing it. Simon quotes psychologist Harriet Lerner: "Manipulators aren't always malicious. They may act from fear or helplessness." This complexity makes manipulation hard to spot, as it often masquerades as kindness. Take the case of American singer Taylor Swift, who shared experiences of manipulation early in her career. Her manager used phrases like, "You don't want to disappoint your fans, do you?" to push her into extra performances despite exhaustion. Swift recalled, "I felt trapped by a sense of duty, unable to say no." Simon explains that such manipulation exploits the victim's sense of responsibility, hiding the manipulator's true intent. Manipulation is closely tied to power dynamics, thriving in unequal relationships. For example, a boss may use career opportunities to pressure subordinates, or parents may invoke filial duty to demand obedience. Simon cites research showing that larger power gaps increase manipulation rates and raise victims' stress by 35%. This shows manipulation is not just a personal tactic but a product of relational structures. Manipulation's covert nature also lies in its subtle language. Simon notes manipulators use vague or emotionally charged phrases to avoid direct confrontation, like "I'm just looking out for you" or "You're letting everyone down." These phrases seem caring but conceal control, making it hard for victims to object without seeming to reject goodwill. 2. Types and forms of manipulative behavior. Manipulation varies by context and relationship, taking many forms. Simon categorizes it into 3 types: manipulation in intimate relationships, workplaces, and social settings, each with distinct manifestations but unified by psychological control. In intimate relationships, manipulation often appears between partners or close friends, using emotional appeals or silence. Phrases like "if you don't do this, you don't love me" are common tools to control behavior. Steve Jobs provides an example. He used inspiring language like, "We're the only one who can do this," to make employees feel uniquely responsible, driving them to overwork. Simon notes this leverages trust in close relationships, making refusal difficult. Another form is emotional blackmail. Simon describes Allison, whose partner said, "You always let me down," when she declined a weekend trip, pressuring her to comply despite her own plans. Simon explains this uses emotional pressure to erode autonomy. Manipulation in intimate relationships can also manifest as selective silence. Simon recounts Isabella, whose partner refused to communicate after arguments, using silence to force her to apologize. Isabella said, "His silence was like a wall. I had to compromise to break it." Simon views this silence as covert manipulation, creating pressure through emotional withdrawal. In workplaces, manipulation uses authority, duty, or reward promises to control employees. Simon cites Harvard Business School research. About 45% of managers use company expectations or career opportunities to pressure employees, increasing stress by 20%. Noah Brandon, a tech company product manager, whose boss said, "You don't want to miss this promotion chance, do you?" to push him into overtime. Noah recalled, "I felt trapped by expectations, unable to say no." This uses career pressure to override personal boundaries. Workplace manipulation can also appear as subtle hints. Simon describes Camilla, a marketing specialist, whose colleague used teamwork rhetoric to offload extra tasks onto her. Camilla felt bound by social pressure, leading to burnout. Simon argues this exploits social proof to enforce compliance. Another workplace tactic is false promises. Simon recounts James, an engineer, whose boss promised, "Finish this project, and I'll recommend you for a promotion," only to later cite company policy to delay it. James felt betrayed and his trust eroded. Simon notes this tactic undermines workplace trust through induced compliance. In social settings, manipulation often involves alienation, coldness, or group pressure among friends or acquaintances. Simon describes Sophia, whose friend said, "If you skip the party, everyone will think you're aloof," pressuring her to attend against her will. Sophia felt controlled by group pressure, unable to voice her true feelings. Simon cites Oxford University research: social manipulation can increase loneliness by 15% due to fears of exclusion. Social manipulation can also take the form of collective silence. Simon mentions Aiden, a young man whose suggestions in a social media group chat were ignored, making him feel isolated. Aiden said, "Being ignored made me feel invisible." Simon analyzes this silence as covert manipulation, undermining confidence through neglect. Social manipulation may also use moral coercion. Simon describes Maria, whose friend said, "If you don't donate, you're not compassionate enough," pressuring her to give despite financial struggles. Maria felt trapped by moral pressure and complied. Simon argues this exploits social norms, making refusal feel like a moral failure. 3. The deep impact of manipulative behavior. Manipulation's harm lies in its covert and lasting effects. Unlike overt conflict, it subtly undermines mental health and relationships. Simon combines research and cases to reveal its damage to individuals and relationships. For individuals, manipulation causes anxiety, self-doubt, and trust issues. Stanford research shows that long-term manipulation victims experience a 25% rise in anxiety and a 10% drop in self-esteem within 6 months. For example, Allison, under her partner's manipulation, began feeling not good enough and questioned her decision-making. Simon quotes psychologist Nathaniel Branden, "Manipulation erodes self-perception, making people doubt their worth." This self-doubt can lead to depression or social withdrawal. Manipulation can also cause trust issues. Noah, repeatedly manipulated by his boss, saw his trust in colleagues drop by 20%, even avoiding teamwork. Simon notes this trust deficit can spill into other relationships, making victims guarded in intimate settings. Isabella, for instance, developed a fear of relationships due to her partner's silent manipulation, choosing to remain single. Manipulation's damage to relationships is equally severe, undermining equality and trust. Data from the American Association for Marriage and Family Therapy shows 30% of divorce cases involve manipulation. Taylor Swift, for example, felt a loss of self due to her manager's manipulation early on, ultimately ending the partnership. Simon calls manipulation a hidden poison in relationships, breaking bonds through control and pressure. In workplaces, manipulation reduces team efficiency. Google research shows that when managers use tactics like sacrifice for the company, team morale drops by 15%, stifling innovation. Camilla's experience with subtle colleague manipulation led to isolation and her eventual resignation. Similarly, James's false promise ordeal caused burnout, harming his performance. At a societal level, manipulation erodes group trust. Aiden's exclusion through group silence led him to withdraw from his social circle. Maria's moral coercion experience made her skeptical of her friend group, reducing her social engagement. Sociologist Robert Putnam's research shows manipulation undermines social capital, reducing community cooperation by 10%. Manipulation's covert nature lies in its disguise as well-meaning advice or reasonable expectations. Simon quotes psychologist John Gottman, "Manipulation isn't care, it's control in disguise." This disguise makes it hard to detect until psychological pressure becomes unbearable. 4. Recognizing the signs of manipulation. To counter manipulation, you must first spot its signs. Simon provides psychological tools to identify manipulation through behavior, emotions, and context. Behavioral signs include guilt induction, false promises, or subtle threats. For example, a manipulator might say, "If you don't help, you don't value me." In workplaces, signs include bosses using career opportunities to pressure employees. In intimate relationships, it might be a partner's coldness or emotional blackmail. Simon suggests keeping a behavior log, recording a person's words and attitudes daily for a week to spot patterns. Noah, for instance, logged his boss's frequent use of disappointment to pressure him, confirming manipulation. Emotional signs focus on the victim's feelings. Persistent guilt, anxiety, or self-doubt in a relationship may signal manipulation. Stanford research shows manipulation victims' cortisol levels rise by 20%, indicating measurable stress responses. Allison, under her partner's manipulation, felt intense guilt and logged her emotions, confirming the manipulation. She wrote, "Every time he said I let him down, I felt like a failure." Textual signs require analyzing the situation. Manipulation often occurs in unequal power dynamics, like boss to employee or dominant to submissive partner. Simon advises watching for shifts in relationship dynamics. Sudden emotional appeals may signal manipulation. Camilla noticed her colleagues' frequent teamwork rhetoric during critical projects, realizing it was manipulation. Simon's third-party validation method involves sharing observations with two trusted people to avoid bias. Sophia, suspecting her friend's manipulation, discussed it with others, who confirmed similar experiences, validating her judgment. Simon also stresses frequency and persistence. A single guilt-inducing comment may be a misunderstanding, but repeated instances likely indicate manipulation. A University of California study shows that multiple manipulations within a month raise social anxiety risk by 30%. Distinguishing reasonable requests from manipulation is key. Simon notes that reasonable requests respect mutual needs, while manipulation serves one party's interests. For example, a friend asking, "Can you help me move?" is reasonable, but if you don't help, you're not a real friend is manipulative. Iden, by comparing his friend's behavior to others' communication, confirmed the group's silence was manipulative. Countering and overcoming manipulation. Simon offers 3 practical strategies: emotional management, psychological defense, and external support to protect yourself, repair relationships, or exit toxic environments. Emotional management is the first step. Simon's behavior observation technique involves pausing when you feel manipulated, taking 5 deep breaths, and noting the other's actions and your emotions. This clarifies manipulation patterns. Noah used this to identify his boss's tactics, enabling calmer responses. Simon cites research showing this method reduces anxiety by 15%. Another emotional tool is self-affirmation. Simon suggests silently telling yourself, "My choices are valid. I have the right to say no," to build resilience. Isabella used self-affirmation against her partner's silent manipulation, regaining confidence to assert her needs. Psychologist Nathaniel Brandon's research shows self-affirmation boosts self-esteem by 10%. Psychological defense is the core strategy, using Simon's 3-step model: identify intent, state your position, and set boundaries. For example, you might tell a partner, "When you say I don't love you, I feel pressured. I want equal communication, or I'll limit contact." This I-focused approach avoids confrontation. Taylor Swift later set boundaries with her manager, refusing unreasonable demands and regaining career control. Timing and tone matter in psychological defense. Simon advises addressing manipulation when the other party is calm, avoiding heated moments. Camilla, facing her colleague's subtle manipulation, privately said after a team meeting, "I want fairer task distribution, or I'll reconsider collaboration." This was firm yet respectful. Simon quotes John Gottman, Successful communication is 75% listening and 25% speaking. Listening to the other's perspective reduces defensiveness and fosters dialogue. External support includes professional help and social networks. Simon recommends consulting a therapist to learn healthy communication. Allison, through cognitive behavioral therapy, countered her partner's manipulation and rebuilt confidence, using boundary statements like "I need you to respect my choices." Supportive friends also reduce manipulation's impact. Research shows those with strong social support face 20% lower depression risk when manipulated. For unresolvable manipulation, Simon suggests strategic withdrawal. James, after confirming his boss's false promises, switched jobs, regaining work enthusiasm. Maria, after moral coercion, distanced herself from friends and joined a new social circle. Simon emphasizes withdrawal isn't failure but self-protection to make room for healthier relationships. Simon also advocates preventive communication as a long-term strategy. In new relationships, set clear expectations for equal communication, like "I want us to discuss issues openly, not use pressure." This reduces manipulation's likelihood. A Cambridge University study shows teams with predefined communication rules have 15% higher collaboration efficiency. Epilogue: Mastering your psychological power. Manipulation, like invisible strings, tugs at our emotions and actions. Yet, as Simon writes in Who's Pulling Your Strings, true freedom lies in mastering your psychological power. By understanding manipulation's nature, spotting its signs, and taking effective countermeasures, we can shift from passive victims to masters of our minds. Manipulation reminds us of the complexity and value of relationships. Whether it's emotional blackmail in intimate bonds, duty-driven pressure in workplaces, or subtle control in social circles, manipulation reflects our deep desire for connection. Simon quotes psychologist Brené Brown, "True connection is built on freedom and respect." By learning to recognize and counter manipulation, we pave the way for healthier relationships. Take action. Start by keeping a behavior log to observe your relationships. Try an honest conversation to set your boundaries. Or confide in a trusted friend about your concerns. Manipulation may never fully disappear, but through awareness and effort, we can reclaim our psychological power. Just as a beam of light dispels darkness, a single honest word can cut through manipulation's strings. Let's counter manipulation with respect and rebuild connections through equality. Simon concludes, psychological freedom isn't a destination but an ongoing journey. May we all become masters of our minds, using sincerity and courage to illuminate every corner of our relationships.